Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to our all-in-one tutorial for the A2A simulations Aerostar 600. In this tutorial I'll teach you everything you need to know to be able to fly the airplane in normal operations and even in a little bit of basic abnormal operations such as an engine out. Contrary to my normal tutorial series, which are usually split between all the different parts, we're going to do everything in one video for this airplane, following a typical introduction flight that you may very well also experience in the real world like this. We're currently in Dienstlaken Schwarze Heide using real-world weather. This is the field where I did my real-world private pilot training, by the way. And as you can see, it's a little bit cloudy, but it should be absolutely sufficient for what we intend to do today. So let's actually go ahead and start with the walkaround. Needless to say that this video is not intended for real-world flying, so if you do have to have a real Aerostar at hand, then be so kind and read the pilot manuals, respectively consult a certified flight instructor. Alright, so we're going to start our walk around, and we'll start it right from here at the pilot's door. Now, the first thing that you want to do in case this is a night flight that you intend to do is to turn on all the lights so that you can check them during the walk around. If you don't intend to do a night flight, then you might as well leave them off. So we've got the static port over here, which we verified to be clean, and then we can move all the way along the nose. You can see I haven't cleaned the airplane in a while. We'll get to that in a moment when we get inside and have a look at the electronic flight bag. Now let's also have a look down here at the nose wheel and the nose wheel steering mechanisms. Also, we've got the landing lights in the front over here. Now, moving on along the aircraft, the first thing we got to do is to remove the chocks on the right hand side. Now, when we're already down here, we can also have a look at the landing gear down here, ensuring that everything is in good working condition. And then we're going to have a look at the oil level of the engine. For that, we can open the flap over here and pull out the device, and we can see we've got a nice oil level over here. If that drops too low, you can refill it using the app in the electronic flight bag. Alright, then let's put that away again, and we can close the hatch. Nice little animation, by the way. Alright, now we're going to have a look at the propeller, making sure that there are no visible signs of damages. We go along the leading edges, checking for any cracks. We check the engine for any side of bird nesting and that kind of stuff. And then we're walking along the wing, and at the outer edges we make sure that the lights are okay, and then we can also have a look down here into the fuel tank to verify physically that there is fuel in there. Now, it's a little bit hard to see when you look at it from this side, but if you go a little bit to the back, then you can actually see how there is like not full fuel in here right now. A little bit easier in the real world, of course. Alright, so that's that. Now let's walk along the trailing edge of the wing. We're also going to have a look at the flap, at the aileron, at the trim tab, making sure that it's not damaged. And then we get to the tail end of the airplane. Down here, we of course check everything and the visual conditions. We remove the pitot cover from the top over here, and we also remove our towing equipment that we might have at the back over here. So if your aircraft was moored down, then be sure to remove this. Now, when might you want to place this? Basically when you're parking the aircraft in turbulent or in windy conditions. Now, moving along the aft part of the plane, we can have a look into the cargo compartment down here, just making sure that there is nothing unexpected in there. And when you close it, make sure that you actually lock it down there. Happens automatically. Now we got the next part of the fuel tanks. This one is the fuselage tank. In here we also have some fuel in here. Again, not very full. We are going to refuel it once we are inside the airplane. Now, trailing edge is looking good. We can remove the chocks down here. And then once again, on the other end side, we take a look into the wing tank. Again, easiest way to see how full it is by looking from the back over here. We can see it's not very full, still has a little bit of fuel in it. And that's it. So lights are in good shape. The leading edge, as you can see, pretty dirty. But apart from that, the airplane is in a good shape. Now we are going to check the oil level on the left-hand engine. Open this up, and now let's go ahead and have a look. And as you can see, just shy of 9, so still pretty full. Alright, cool. Let's put this away. And close the hatch, and that's it then. Alright, so props, leading edges, anything on the inside of the engine, and then we also have a look at the landing gear down here, have a look at the wheels, and well, that's everything that we can do in this model. So far so good. Then let's open up that door and get inside. When you click down here, that actually brings you right to the cockpit of the airplane. Now, let's go ahead and take out the EFB, which is located down here in that holder by default. And you can move it around the flight deck by just clicking and dragging the lower part of the EFB. Or you can just attach it to the control column when you click the left and the right mouse key. That binds it to the controls so that now you can see I can just keep it on here. If you want to detach it again, just press left and right mouse click at the same time. Now in here we got the A2A Aerostar 600 app, and that's the one we want to take a look at. Now let's go ahead and go over this real quick and some of the options that we've got available in here. So on the home screen you have the version number. Apart from that, you know it's an Aerostar. So on the flight info page, a little bit of interesting stuff like the current weather conditions, including the winds. Then, most importantly, you've got the checklists over here, both the normal and the emergency checklists, which are really, really useful to have available straight away in flight, and we will be using those later on to fly the airplane as well. On the general aircraft tab, you got a little bit of stuff like your estimated endurance and stuff, but you also get that down here on the fuel computer when you have initialized that correctly. Last but not least, a little bit of general information here, like the rotation speed, 85 knots at max takeoff weight, then climb power settings, 24, 24, couple of airspeeds that you want to be aware of, and a little bit of good stuff of information. Now going to the control screen, up here we can select the different GPS units that we may want to have. For example, I've equipped my airplane with a GNS 430 as primary navigation unit. I could also choose the GTN 750XI, so the units from TDS up there. We could also select a no GPS setup if we want to, and then just use the old school style RNAV computer. Now, we'll be using a GNS 430 today for our navigation. In the options down here, cockpit persistence is a really nice one. It generally saves your panel state, and whenever you re-enter the aircraft on a new flight, it's going to load it up exactly the way you left it, which is a really nice feature. You can also do that by livery down here. I've turned that off because I don't know, kind of like to switch around liveries. Then realistic park and brake means that you have to press the pedals in before you can pull out the brake lever so that it actually brakes. And now realistic steering, that's a very interesting one. Basically, down here is the nose wheel steering button. It's just left and right. So if you enable realistic steering, then you cannot steer it using the rudder pedals, or, well, to a certain extent with differential braking, but then you'll actually have to use the switch down here. Since it is located so inconveniently outside your primary field of vision when operating the aircraft, I opted to turn realistic steering off so that I can steer the airplane using my rudder pedals. Now, gyro drift is a really interesting one, and we'll talk about that in flight. And gyro sounds, well, the sounds may be a little bit annoying to some of you at when you do lengthy flights, but personally I like it because it's realistic, so I'm keeping this on. Now, with the JPI options, you can switch your fuel computer between the more modern unit and a little bit of an older unit, and you can switch whether you want to have the temperatures in Celsius or Fahrenheit. Metric temperature, well, Celsius versus Fahrenheit. Metric air pressure, that one is quite relevant for your primary altimeter. We can see I've got it turned on and it's in hectopascals. If I turn this off, it's going to be in inches. So up to you, you only have one altimeter in this aircraft. And since I will be doing most of my flying outside North America, I will be using this in a metric. Clock 24 hours just steers whether you get AM, PM, or whether you get a 24-hour clock up there. Okay, you also got some advanced options down here where you can enable 8.33 kilohertz radios. Originally, in the real world, those units that you got down here were not equipped with those. They were 25 kilohertz radios, but using this setup you can enable 6 digits, which I would absolutely recommend anyone to do. You can also control how strong turbulences act on the airplane. I'm leaving this on the default middle position there. The wear rate is normal. You can also make the airplane wear down more quickly. That way it's going to deteriorate more quickly. And then you've got a failure rate, which I've also got at norm, so that I get a realistic rate of failure supplying. Now, fuel and payload. This is where you set your... This is where you load your airplane. And since we will be doing a training flight today, it will only be you and me. So we are going to remove any of those passengers down here. We also have nothing in the baggage compartment. Then we are going to refill the airplane. So let's just make that full. And down here you can quickly update the digital engine monitor with the current fuel figure, which is a quite nice feature. So I'm going to click this so that we don't have to do it manually. Whenever you're loading the airplane, a couple things to take care of. And the first one is the center of gravity down here. You want to keep that within the white line and not get into the red line, otherwise you're illegal to fly. And up here you got your maximum allowable weight, and on the very top you got your actual weight. Can switch that to meters if you want to. I'd keep it in pounds because, well, it's an American airplane. They're made to be flown in pounds. Alright, so always make sure that your total weight stays below the max takeoff weight. As you can see, you can easily overload the airplane, so be a little careful with that. You can also get it out of the center of gravity limits with this. Cool. And finally, we've got the maintenance page where we can do all kind of engine maintenance. Here we can also wash the airplane and clean the airplane from bugs. You can notice that we caught quite a lot of bugs on the leading edges here on my like 5 flight hours acquainting myself with the airplane. So let's go ahead, clean the bugs, and now we've got a nice and shiny airplane again. Now this is not only going to make it nice and shiny, it will also improve the aerodynamics, and you will feel that. When the plane is full of bugs, you will notice it will fly a little bit slower, it will lift off with a little bit more, let's say it will need a little bit more convincing to lift off, that kind of stuff. You can also inspect the airplane and overall the airframe down here. You can also just choose whether you want a new, a used, or an auctioned airplane. And you have a couple nice functions here, like inspecting the engines. You can see mine, even though they've run a couple hours now, pretty much 5 hours, they're still in an okay shape. So I haven't like completely wrecked them. Now, something I would absolutely recommend you guys to do is to not constantly fix these things. That stuff breaks in the real world. And as long as it isn't like grounded, it's absolutely fine not to always press overhaul all. Likewise, you can analyze the engine performance and the electrical system down here, but that's really stuff that you are not going to need too much. So, let's go ahead and actually go and fly the airplane. We are going to do this completely realistically, and completely realistic means that we are going to follow the checklist in the read and do principle. Now, many of you know checklists from airliners where you carry out the entire procedure and the flow first, and then thereafter you use the checklist to make sure that you've done everything. In general aviation that's not done because pilots typically don't fly that much and therefore aren't as proficient on their aircraft. For this reason, the checklists are carried out as read and do. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that door up here. It's going to close the bottom first and then the top next. And when the door closes, make sure that it's locked on both sides over here. You can unlock them manually if you want to reopen the door, but make sure that the red tabs are underneath the green triangles, indicating that the doors are locked. Alright, with that we are safe to go down here, so let's go ahead and start with the B4 engine start checklist. Pre-flight complete. That verifies that you've done the walkaround and that you have done all your pre-flight preparations, documents on boards, etc. Passengers briefed, seatbelts secured, that's our own seatbelts here, so nothing to do in the sim. Cabin door closed and locked, again closed and locked. Then battery and ignition is off, the gear switch, that's hidden behind here is down, the landing gear is down, the flaps are up, and that's the switch over here, which you can put into the up position. But if the flaps are already up, then you just leave it in neutral. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about how this lever works a bit later in the tutorial. Okay, so then we continue. Brakes, test for firm, and that's, you just press those and make sure that they do respond properly. Okay, flight controls free. And as we can see, they are completely free. Okay, parking brake set down here, and the lever is pulled out, so the parking brake is set. Then switch is all off, and for this we go over the entire flight deck. So you got your main switches down here on the bottom left, they're all off. Then you got the fuel selector off, boost pump off, magneto down here, a little bit nicely hidden. Let's just move that lever up. Over here you can see it easier, and as we can see, the magnetos are in the off position. Don't forget to put that gear lever back down before you apply electricity. Alright, then moving along the cockpit, we got a couple of avionics switches up here. Off, off, off. And then on the right hand side, we've got the auxiliary hydraulics that are off. We've got the right engine controls, which are all off. Hydraulic valve doesn't have an off position, so this does not apply. And the blower is off, and the fan is in the off middle position as well. Alright, and that's that. Okay, so battery on. On. Then gear lock lights on. That's the 3 green lights. Elevator and rudder trim neutral, located down here, and as we can see, they're not entirely neutral. The elevator is still trimmed up a little bit from the last flight. We can correct this by turning the auto trim on up here, and then we can just trim down, and like that we can move the trim back into the neutral position. If you do this, remember to turn the trim back off afterwards, since the switch is still supposed to be in the off position. Alright, and with that, they are both neutral. Okay, so hydraulic shutoff valve open. That's the switch in the up position. So that is open. Then fuel checked, and for that we have the 3 gauges, left wing, fuselage and right wing, and we've also visually inspected the gauges to be correct. This is something that you always want to do. The fuel indicators are rather simplistic systems which can break down, and honestly, they're not very accurate in general aviation aircraft either way, so you always want to have a visual look into the fuel tanks as well, like we did on the walkaround. So, fuel low warning off, that would be located up here. We can see that if we press the test button, low fuel, there it is. So, the low fuel warning is off. Circuit breakers in. For that, let's move over here and always have a close look from the top. If a breaker was out, it would look something like that. And as you can see, no breaker is out at the moment. And then altimeter and clock set. For the altimeter, we can just dial in field elevation, which is 217 feet over here. Like that, and the clock is set. Alright, and that's our before engine start checklist complete. Now, something that's worth mentioning is that these checklists here are designed in a 1960s philosophy, and that means they don't cover everything. They still leave you with a little bit of, let's say, airmanship left. For example, you will notice that when we go into the engine start checklist, it never tells you to turn on the beacon light. So it also never tells you to check that the area around the props are actually clear. Oh, look at that, our windows are fogging up. Well, we are gonna heal that in a few moments. So always think along a little bit. So the before engine start checklist is complete. Now we've got the engine start checklist. And the first thing that I want to do before starting the engine is to turn on the beacon, which is not mentioned on the checklist. So beacon light located down here. Let's turn that on. Okay, so engine start checklist. Prop is full forward. Mixture, idle cutoff. Prop, throttle, cracked. Now, cracked is a very unspecific term, and that's because depending on the state of your engines, you might need more or less throttle. So this is the idle position. Normally I'd call something like this cracked. Sometimes they need a little bit more like that as well. So we just have to determine what is correct for your airplane, depending on its state. So just get acquainted to which throttle position it takes to be able to start your engines, and then use that position. That's why it's just saying cracked over here without any further detail. So battery on, and it's on. Okay, low fuel warning out. Fuel selectors, cycle and listen. So you got no actual indication of where the fuel selectors are set to. For this reason, we do want to check them. So let's move down here, put them to on, and then just listen. You can see it's operating just fine. You can test that on crossfeed position as well. And back to the main position, and we'll do the same on the right-hand side. Okay, so fuel selector, cycle, and listen. Then right fuel boost on. So that's the right fuel boost going on. And now what we're going to do is to take the right mixture, put it to full, check for fuel flow, and by doing that we're also priming the engine. So give it a couple seconds. Let's go ahead and try this. So right fuel flow full. We can see fuel pressure and a little fuel flow up there as well. Give it 5 seconds and then we return the mixture lever into the off position. Okay, then right starter engage. And before we do that, let's take a second to talk about how to start those engines. So you primed it by turning on the fuel pump and adding some mixture. However, the engine also needs some air to be able to start, and that's basically what the throttle is doing here. So what we're going to do is to turn the magneto to the start position, and you might hear the engine like cough a little bit. When it's doing that, add your mixture, and then the engine should fire. It is important that the throttle is in the correct position, so especially in the beginning when you still get used to the airplane, you might have to play with it for a little bit, maybe use a little bit more throttle, a little bit less throttle. So you just have to get used to how your airplane wants to be operated. So let's give this a try. I'm going to open the throttle a little bit over here. The area in front of the engine is clear. Then let's go ahead, turn on the starter and see what's going to happen. And here it is, starting. So mixture full forward, and then use the throttle to bring it down to 1000 RPMs. Okay, so throttle set for 1000, right fuel boost off, then gyro pressure check, that's up here, gyro pressure is in the green. We also have a quick look at the oil pressure, making sure that the engine is actually operating normally. You can see that down here. We do have oil pressure. Okay, and then right alternator switch on, and repeat for the left engine. Okay, so again for the left engine, open the throttle into the cracked position, then fuel boost pump on, mixture full forward. We can see fuel pressure, we can see fuel flow. Give it a couple seconds. And then we go back into the cutoff position, fuel pump remains on, and then a quick check, left engine is all clear, so let's go ahead and turn it on. Looks like we need a bit more throttle here to get the engine to respond. Here we go, mixture on, and then throttle back to 1000 RPMs. Like this. Alright, good. So, quick check of the engine. Most important, oil pressure is there. And gyro pressure is still looking good. Then let's go ahead and turn on the left alternator. And that completes the engine start checklist. And here is the real point where what I said earlier really comes to fruition. If you go to the warm-up checklist, that basically assumes that all the avionics, everything has been set. So you can see that there is no checklist item for that. So let's just go ahead and attach the tablet to our yoke for a moment here, while we actually turn on all the avionics. So avionic master switch, autopilot switch, auto trim switch. Then we ensure that if a GPS unit is installed, the autopilot reference is set to heading, not to GPSS. Then going further along the panel, we ensure that our DME is turned on, select either nav1 or nav2. Transponder can go into standby, The correct squawk is set down here. The DG slave switch is on, and that's a very important one. We'll be talking about why later on when we actually go flying. Okay, then our radio is turned on, and if those things are not coming on, down here are the on switches, so turn that one on and then they come to life. The GPSs can be turned on using the brightness selector up here, and then we'll just let that initialize, and that's it. Now, that's basically the radio setup. Something I would do if I intend to fly up into the flight levels, which we will be doing in today's flight, is to make myself a note of the current QNH. And for that, I've got a 1026 over here, pretty much, like in the middle between 1025 and 1026. So what I'm going to do is I'll just set my ADF to that particular number. So now I know 1026. I know, that's a nice little trick. That's how I do this. Now, getting over to the fuel computer, we can refill the amount of fuel in here. The way this works is you give it the start value, so the actual fuel that you've got on board the airplane, and then it has the fuel use data, so it knows how much fuel you are currently using, and that way it can calculate how much fuel you still have on board. But this is a little dangerous there, because shit in means shit out. So be careful when you do this. In our case, we had already used the tablet and the update digital engine monitor function down here, so that way we don't need to fill anything. If you haven't refueled the airplane, and it always remembers the amount of fuel you left it with if you've got the panel state persistence on, then you just click the exit button down here. If you want to get back into adding a fuel quantity, you've got to press both buttons at the same time. Okay, and that's everything we need to do down here for the setup for now. Okay, so remaining fuel 165.1, and indeed that's what those are going to add up to, so we are totally fine up here. Alright, cool. So that way we are now completely ready to go and taxi the airplane. At this point, a little recommendation: if you go... Nope, don't stow this. If you go down into the Navigraph chart app, then you can actually use the Navigraph Safe Taxi database, which is quite useful if you just want some moving maps right inside your cockpit, and also some en route charts available over here as well. So really useful thing. I really like using this. However, it does require a Navigraph subscription to be able to do so. Alright, and now that we are done with everything, let's have a quick look at the lights that our airplane has before we go and taxi. So I'm just going to stow this. So down here we got the light controls. We got the beacon, the strobes, nav lights, cabin lights, and then the landing lights. You can see that there's no taxi light or stuff like that. Generally in a small aircraft like this and on airports like this, we wouldn't be using a taxi light. And during daylight you wouldn't actually be using any of those because it just breaks down the lamps. But if you were flying at night, make sure to turn the nav light on as well, perhaps the landing lights for taxi. Alright, and that's everything we got down here. So let's go ahead and taxi to runway 26 for today's departure. So park and brake released, and you can see that at 1000 RPMs the airplane actually starts rolling, and quite a bit of braking will be required to keep it at a decent speed when you are not going in a long straight line. So just get used to how the airplane feels. I find it taxis really well. Generally A2A is doing great models. A couple of things that we should take, or that we should pay attention to when we are taxiing the plane. The first is correct responses of the gyros when going through turns. So make sure that the turn indicator responds when you do a left or a right turn. Make sure that the ball deflects, and make sure that your directional gyro is actually turning the HSI. So I've got a left turn coming up here, and thereafter a right turn. During those turns, make sure that the instruments react accordingly, like you can see here. Left deflection, ball to the right, turns left, and the same into the other way, like this. Okay. Keep a good eye on your taxi speed. I do recommend to get up the ground speed readout over there, because the plane does get pretty fast if you keep those 1000 RPM as you are supposed to when idling the engines. Like, look at that, we're already at 25 knots, which looks incredibly fast on a small taxiway like this one. And about to reach 30 knots over here. What I would recommend to do in order to preserve a little bit of brake life is that you apply the same procedures that, for example, the big airline manufacturers want. You let them accelerate to 30, then you brake them back down to 10, let them accelerate again, and that works pretty well. Now we're about to start the run-up. For that, I would recommend to position the airplane like slightly turned, like this, so that you don't damage anything behind you. Then just straighten it out, stop it, and set that park and brake. Alright, and now we are going to get our tablet back out. Let's return to the A2A app, flight info page, and then we can do the warm-up and run-up checklist. I'm also going to detach the tablet from the Yoke so that we can see things a little bit easier. Okay, so starting with the warm-up and run-up checklist. We do warm the engine up at 1000 RPMs, as I told you earlier already, and that's about 1000 RPMs over here. Engine temperatures check. What are we looking for? Basically, if the oil temperature was too low, you would see it on the EDM. So, if you do get an oil warning here, then don't conduct the run-up until the engine is sufficiently warm. Basically, you can also have a look at the temperatures up here. If they're within the green range, then you are safe to conduct the run-up. Now, let's go ahead with the next step, which is propellers full forward, and they are. Mixture, rich, it is. And then throttles for 1500 RPMs. And something you may notice if you have already used the airplane for a while is that the props may not necessarily respond to exactly the same power setting with exactly the same throttle setting. So it is recommendable that you use two dedicated levers for your throttles. So we're at 1500 RPM, engine instruments check. We basically make sure that all our indications are fine, nothing out of the ordinary over here. Then, alternator, check for 28 volts. The way you do this is, by default it shows you the amps. If you want to see the volts, you gotta push and hold that button. And as you can see, it's right at 28 volts up here. Okay, then, throttle, set for 2100 RPMs. For that, let's increase our throttle a little bit further. Always do that nice and slowly. And here we go, 2100 RPMs. Now, props cycle to 1000 RPMs to a maximum of 4 times. This is done so that the oil gets distributed well within the propellers for in-flight use. So, what we're going to do is to pull the prop levers back until the props drop to 1000, like that, then back up to maximum. And depending on how cold it is and if the airplane has already been flown, you might have to do that 1 through 4 times. But don't let the engines drop beneath 1000 RPMs. You can nicely see on the gauge there how one engine is reacting a little bit quicker than the other one over here. Look at that, the right one, a little bit better condition than the left one in our case. So this has been 3 times, it's not too hot, it's not too cold. That should be absolutely sufficient. If it's like really cold, do it 4 times. Okay, next up, we are going to check the magnetos for a maximum of 175 RPM drop. Now, I'm going to start on the left side here, and you always start on both and start with the right magneto first. So, 2 times to the left, watch at the drop, which is 100, and then back into the both position. Now we do the left one, again, drops by 100, and back into the both position. The reason you do right first, left second, and always return it to both in the meantime, is so that if you accidentally leave it without returning to the both position, then you are still a step away from the off position. So you're not accidentally going to shut your engine. Now we're going to do the same with the right-hand engine here. That's dropping by 100, back to both. Left side, dropping by 100, back to both. If you get a CHT warning here, you can disregard that temporarily, and then we can check the gyro pressure, which is up here, has to be in the green, and then we are going to return our engine back to 1000 RPMs. Like that. Alright, cool. And that's our warm-up and run-up checklist complete. So we got the before takeoff checklist next, which interestingly enough ends in throttle full forward. So this is kinda designed to be done on the runway. I would recommend to do everything down to park and brake release immediately after the run-up, so that it gets a little bit easier. So cabin door closed and locked, and we can see that's closed and locked on both sides. Okay, controls free. Let's just do another control check over here. Like that. Mixture full forward, which it is. Fuel select is on, so that's down here, on and on. Okay, props full forward, they are. Boost pumps on, so number 1 is on and number 2 is on. Then instruments checked, so over here we just make sure that the ADI is aligned. We check that the heading on the directional gyro matches the backup instrument. You can see 040, 040. If they were not agreeing, then you would probably have left the DG slave switch off. In that case, the directional gyro may have drifted. If you turn that back on, it's eventually slowly going to return back to the correct setting, but that's going to take time. That's why it's so important that we check that this switch is on right from the start. Okay, so instruments checked, radio set. Most important, make sure that your transponder goes into the alt position down here and that the correct squawk is dialed in. Frequencies should have been set anyway at this point. Okay, so flaps 0 to 20 degrees. Now let's take a moment to talk about the flaps, because as you can see, the lever is like freely moving the flaps to any position you may like. For pretty much any normal takeoff that's not a short field takeoff, keeping them in the up position is totally sufficient. Otherwise, either 10 or 20 degrees, recommended 20, can be used if you need to shorten your takeoff run on the ground and have no obstacle problems after takeoff. Now, if you're wondering, so how much takeoff distance am I actually going to need, then I do recommend a look into the product manual, which you can either download on the A2A website or find in the add-ons folder in the Aftermath. And in here, if you do scroll down a little bit, you actually get the real-world graphs from the airplane. Now, how do you do this? Let's just quickly talk about it. You enter with the temperature and the elevation. Unfortunately, this is Fahrenheit, so you might have to do a little bit of conversion work there. So, following the example, we enter down there and then move up to our elevation, which in case of this example is 2,000 feet. You move all the way to the right to the takeoff weight of the airplane, in this case maximum takeoff weight, and then you go down to the respective headwind component. 0 is at the top. If you had 10, then you would be moving, for example, down here. In case of this example, we've got like 25 knots of headwind, so I'm moving all the way down here to about 25, then to the bottom. Total takeoff distance over a 50-foot obstacle is about 1,000 feet, and that's with a flap 20 takeoff. So that way you can calculate your takeoff performance. Obviously, this would all be done in the pre-flight preparations already. Okay, and this is your flap setting. So up for normal takeoffs, only if you need like really short field takeoffs, then you can use flaps 20 for your takeoff. Okay, so flaps 0, trim set. This is again looking down here, making sure that both trims are in the neutral position. Then we've got pitot heat as desired. Personally, I would recommend that you always turn it on. I would just always turn it on. You can't really break anything by doing that, so just do it. Okay, and then we just have park and brake release and throttle full forward, and with that the before takeoff checklist is complete. So before we actually take off, let's just quickly review the takeoff procedure, and then we go into actually executing the takeoff. So if you have a look at the after takeoff checklist, we got wheels brake. That's to avoid gyroscopic effects when you're retracting the landing gear. Then gear up, flaps up. Now, the next checklist we got is the climb checklist, which says maximum climb is achieved at 122 knots. fuel pumps off at 1000 feet, reduce power to 24 inches and 2400 RPMs, and then trim for a climb speed between 122 and 160. Why is that? Because the airplane can climb at up to 1800 feet a minute. However, it does not have a pressurized cabin, and anything exceeding 1000 feet a minute can really hurt in your ears. Actually, 500 feet a minute already is very, very notable. Most airliners climb the cabin at about 300 feet a minute. Obviously we want to climb faster than that, but I do suggest limiting the rate of climb to 1000 feet a minute. Therefore your speed is going to end up somewhere over here, 140, 150-ish. And that works pretty well. Okay, and that's the two checklists we've got for that. So when airborne, apply brakes, retract landing gear, then retract the flaps and climb out at 122 knots minimum. Now let's take an actual look into how we are going to fly that takeoff. So we will line up on the runway, then apply maximum throttle, which will bring both the RPMs and the manifold pressure to the maximum. We check that our engine instruments are all indicating correctly. Release the brakes, let it accelerate. At 85 knots, so around about here at the red line, we are going to rotate, and A2A have done a really good flight model. So you will immediately notice how the airplane initially is behind the power curve. The nose will come up, it won't lift off immediately, and when it lifts off, you shouldn't climb too steeply. Just give it a few hundred feet a minute, like 500 feet a minute, while you let the airplane accelerate. When you are 400 feet above ground, that is 600 feet on the altimeter for us, since our elevation is roughly 200, we are going to reduce our power to 24 inches on the manifold and 2400 RPMs. And then we are going to climb at about 120 knots, while climbing out to at least 1000 AGL. Reaching 1000, we turn the fuel pumps off, and then we can resume the en route climb at 1000 feet a minute, climbing up to a good level. Now, our plan for today is to actually find a way on top of the clouds so that we can do a couple of stall exercises. I see that there's a couple of holes over there, so we will be departing to the right hand side and go on top through those holes over there. Okay, and that's everything that there is. So let's go ahead and bring this to practical use. The parking brake can be released. We'll line our aircraft up on runway 26 here at Dienstlaken, and then we'll get going. Now, last check, transponder is on, and the approach area is of course clear. In terms of lights, during the daylight you don't really need anything but the beacon. If it's dark, then turn on the strobes and turn on your landing lights as well. Typical general aviation flying here. Alright, so let's go ahead and start the timer. So we go to mode, that's the timer up here, then we can click the start switch down here, and then we'll set our power. Up to maximum. You can do this as a rolling takeoff, but for the tutorial, let's just check that all our instruments are okay, which they are, then release the brakes and go. We've got fairly good acceleration on this airplane. It's 60 knots. 85, rotate. You can see it sticks to the ground a bit, and now we're airborne. Alright, we'll just do like 500 feet a minute while accelerating, tap the brakes, gear up. And you can really feel how the airplane gets a lot easier to handle as you accelerate. Now we're at 122 knots, now we can really go into that climb. Maintain the speed while gaining altitude, and passing 400 above the ground, we'll set climb power here. So manifold goes back to 24. Was a bit much. There we go, 24, and the props go back to 24 as well. Here we go, everything's set. Alright, now 1000 feet a minute maximum should be fine, and passing through 1000 AGL we can turn the fuel boost pumps off over here and over here. Alright, flaps should be retracted at this point. Then let's do a right hand turn here to climb out, and while we're gaining some altitude we can search for a good spot where we can go to like 4000 feet above the ground so that we can do a little bit of air work, making ourselves familiar with the way the airplane handles. The Aerostar is a very responsive plane. You can see I'm doing very small inputs on my yoke down here. You also need a little bit of rudder to make sure that you fly it in a coordinated manner. But overall it's climbing like really well. Whenever you're going through a full 1000, I do recommend to check the manifold pressure, because it should drop by 1 inch every 1000 feet of altitude, so be sure that you always add a little bit of throttle. The airplane doesn't have a turbocharger. For this reason we need to keep a good eye on the manifold pressure here while climbing. Stick to 1000 feet a minute because of your ears, otherwise it's just not very nice for your ears. And now let's go up to something like 4000 feet or so. As you can see, we're nicely gaining speed, and when you keep the airplane in trim, which you should always do, except for in a turn, when you keep it in trim, it's going up like really nicely. Very easy to control. Well, and then we are going to maintain ourselves in an area where there is no cloud coverage, so that we can safely do a little bit of air work in a few moments. In general, flying the airplane is done using both your ailerons and your rudder, so you'll always have to use both. Which is kind of normal for, you know, any airplane without a yaw damper. So, standard flight characteristics here. Now, something that I do really like about the Aerostar is that A2A is running an external flight dynamics engine, and that really shows the airplane just handles really nicely. To level off, we start the level off process when we're vertical speed divided by 10 to our altitude, so 1000 feet a minute, 100 to go. We start pushing it forward gently, so that we level off in 4000 as we want to. Let's make sure we go away from those clouds over here. We generally aim to fly rate 1 turns, which means having the needle and ball right on the marker and the ball centered in the middle. It takes a little bit to get the coordination for that right, but once you do, then the airplane flies like really well. Reaching our cruising altitude, let's reduce to climb power setting, or rather to cruise setting, and the easiest you will find in the manual there is to use 20 inches manifold and then 2100 RPMs. So let's go ahead and set that. Note that the manifold increases while you decrease the RPMs, so just gotta get that right. And here we go, everything's set. Alright, so now we're in a nice cruise flight. We are going to make sure that we stay clear of the clouds here while we're conducting our air work, and then we can go ahead with a couple of exercises. The first thing, however, that we do want to get right is the correct leaning of the airplane. There are basically 2 ways on how you can lean the Aerostar. The first one is by going into the manual and finding the correct fuel flow settings. Now, let's go ahead and do that and have a look into what we are going to need. So, back into the product manual over here. It would be really nice if they could add those tables to the EFB, by the way. So, up here we got the data for 5000 feet altitude. So, mixture lean to best economy, which is usually what I would recommend using. And if we zoom in a bit on that table, then we can see that with 2100 RPMs and 20 inches manifold pressure, we should be using a total fuel flow of 19.3 divided by 2, because we've got 2 engines, obviously. We need about 10 gallons per engine in terms of fuel flow. So let's go ahead and actually do that. Now, we just gotta ensure that we stay clear of clouds here. It's not exactly the best flying weather, but should be fine. So, let's go ahead and start leaning. We go down here to the fuel computer and we press the right button where it says lean find. Now we can start leaning. And what we'll do is to slowly pull the mixture lever back. You can see the fuel flow gallons per hour decreasing there. We know already that we're looking for about 10. So let's see what's going to happen while the EGT increases, as we're trying to find the peak number down here. So let's try and find that. And here we go, here's peak EGT. And now we increase the mixture a little bit until the EGT goes about 50 degrees below the peak. And that's our best economy. Like this. Now a quick look outside, making sure we don't go into the clouds here. Now we can do the same on the other engine as well. So let's start reducing this. The engine monitor is going to monitor for the peak in the EGT. At the same time, we make sure that we are maintaining our altitude here. Okay, and there should be our peak EGT like any moment. Here it is. So let's increase the mixture a little bit so that we get peak minus 50. At the same time, I'll fly us out of the clouds again. And then we can start with our airwork. So this is just a little example here of what this may look like. Since we're about to do some airwork anyway, let's go ahead and bring the mixtures back to a full ridge, because we will be using some changed power settings. But this is just an example of how you would lean the aircraft using the fuel computer. Let's press the left button here to exit, and there we go. Alright, cool. So we're now in like 3,700, let's go down to 3,500 just to be on the safe side here, that we've got an easy number that we can work with. The first exercise that I would recommend anybody to familiarize themselves with the handling characteristics of a new airplane is to do steep turns. In order to do steep turns, we are going to do the following. So we got markings on the ADI over here. That's 10 degrees bank, 20, 30, 60. We're going to bring it all the way to 60 degrees of bank, and then you are going to use the elevator to try and maintain the altitude. Make sure that the airplane is completely in trim beforehand, like it is right now, and then we can start the exercise. So let's synchronize the heading back here so that we know where to roll out. There's a heading of 300 degrees right now. Alright, and then let's get started. As we're going past 30 degrees, we need to add a little bit of power so that we can maintain our airspeed. And now let's go ahead and see this in action. So you need to pull a little bit, then going through 30 you need to pull a bit more, also add some power. And here we go, 60 degrees of bank. Use as much power as you need in order to not lose your airspeed. Maintain your altitude. And this way you not only get a feeling for how the airplane handles, you also get to practice your instrument scanning, since you really need to have a careful look at all the instrument you have. So let's do the same to the other side. And here we go. So maintain the bank. We'll maintain 3,500 feet of altitude here. Like that. In the real world you would have almost 2 Gs at this moment. So this is a rather difficult maneuver to fly. In the sim it's a lot easier. A lot easier. Okay, and then we'll roll out. And here we go. So, back to standard power, 20 to 20 inches, 2100 RPMs. Here we go, easy going. Now let's point the aircraft somewhere where we've got a little bit more distance. And next up we are going to do stalls. We'll start with a stall in clean configuration, and then later we are going to do a stall in landing configuration, so that we can see in both cases how our airplane is going to behave. So I think this heading is looking pretty good over here. So let's get started. We'll pull our engines back into idle. Landing gear warning is okay. So let's pitch up a little. Do not trim in the stall exercise, and then you will easily feel when the airplane's about to enter the stall. Here you go. And it's losing it, so push down. You can see you are immediately recovering this. Add a bit of power once your airspeed is safe, and here we are. Okay, so that was fairly easy. To explore the stall characteristics of the airplane fully, or rather the edge characteristics, right on the edge on the envelope, let's reduce power a little bit, and let's try and fly the airplane exactly into these kind of conditions, so that we can see how it reacts. We want to make that experience at high altitude, so like 3,500, 4,000 feet, before we actually accidentally encounter this in a traffic pattern. So let the airspeed reduce gradually, and just get a feeling for how the airplane reacts. You will notice that it will eventually start some buffering. You can hear that in the background, and then it eventually starts to go over a wing. You just need to relax gently over here, and then you've already got it again. So pretty easy handling. Alright, now let's accelerate again, and this time we are going to do the same in the landing configuration to see if there is any difference in the handling characteristics. So when we're doing this, let's first of all talk about how to extend the flaps in the Aerostar, because this is a little bit of a different thing than most aircraft. So you got the flap lever that has an up, a neutral, and down position. Neutral means the flaps don't move. Down starts extending them, and when they're at a position where you want them to be, you put the lever back into the neutral position. Oop. And you do the same for bringing the airplane into, or you do the same for retracting the flaps as well. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Maximum flap speeds, printed right down here. And with that, let's go ahead and give this a go. So we'll start by extending the flaps into the 10-degree position. So lever down. And here we go, that's about 10 degrees of flaps. You can immediately notice a change in the trim of the aircraft. So make sure that we trim it out, make sure that we get the correct feeling for how the airplane is handling. Alright, now that we got this, let's go into the 20 position. You can see again the nose starts coming up rather violently, so be prepared to counter this and keep your airplane under control down there. Now let's go ahead and extend the landing gear, and I'm not going to touch the controls while we do this, so that you get to see how the airplane responds. So, gear down. Obviously, since we do extend something below the center of gravity, it starts to descend and also lose speed, which aggravates that descent. So be prepared to counter that and get the feeling for the plane, so that you know what to expect and how to counteract it. Now, let's go ahead and extend the flaps into the full position. And you can see again, nose is coming down a bit, so be prepared to counter that. Alright, so let's get that speed to bleed off. And then let's experience the stall characteristics in landing configuration. So we're now going towards the end of the green arc. Now we're only flying because of the flaps, and reaching the end of the white arc. Here's the buffet. You can see I need to pull more and more. And now it's going over the wing, so relax the control column, and you got it under control again. Let's just do that one more time, and this time without power. Now you can see it actually starts dropping the nose some earlier, and here it goes. Okay, so let's release that, get it back under control, and here we are. Okay, so now that we've done a couple of high-level exercises, let's go ahead and get the airplane down for a couple of touch and goes to practice landings. So we're going to retract the flaps over here, we're going to retract the landing gear. For standard descents, keep the manifold pressure somewhere in the green range so that you don't shock cool the engines. And then let's find our airport again, should be around about right behind us. Could use the GPS if you want to. While we are flying back to the airport, there's a couple of things that we should talk about in relation on how to operate the autopilot of the Aerostar. So let's go ahead and have a look into how the autopilot works. So you can see the flight director is basically always on. Synchronize everything first. So let's go to heading at 240 over there, staying clear of those clouds. Then we'll just bring the aircraft into a nice straight and level flight. Power 20 inches, 2100 RPMs, like that. Trim it out, and here we go. So those clouds we can look through, therefore we can also fly through them. Alright, so to engage the autopilot, you can see by default you've got heading and attitude modes active. The autopilot's showing off. Now, let's go ahead and change that from attitude to altitude, which we can do down here. And then we press autopilot on. And as you can see, the autopilot now comes on, maintains the heading and maintains the altitude. If you want to make a climb or a descent in the autopilot, then we'll have to use attitude hold mode. You can see that there is no vertical speed mode or something on the Century 4 autopilot system down here. So change to attitude, and then you got that wheel on the right here that's used to change your pitch. So if you want to climb a little bit, just dial that up. You can see now the autopilot responds and starts to climb. Now, what you cannot do with this autopilot is intercept a targeted altitude. So let's say we want to level off in 2,000 feet. I'm going to give it a bit more of a climb here. So let's say we want to level off in 2,000 feet. What we'll have to do is to gradually intercept the altitude using the pitch wheel, and once we've intercepted it, then we can use the altitude knob to maintain it. So you can see I'm using the pitch wheel here to intercept 2,000. Kind of like this. And now that we're level, press altitude, and now the thing is going to maintain the 2,000 feet. Turning is easy, so you can just use the heading bug to fly turns over here. But let's talk about something that's not as easy, and that is following navigation. So let's tune Düsseldorf VOR over here, 1515. Here we go. And we switch it to VOR mode. Okay, so let's find that. Should be somewhere over here. And it does. And now if you just hit nav mode, the thing can follow it quite easily. However, what it can not do that easily is to follow a GPS track. So there's two methods to do this, and we want to talk about them real quick. So let's first of all go ahead and start descending out of those clouds for a bit here. So pitch wheel down, aircraft starts descending. Let's also fly back towards our airfield, so back in a heading mode. We'll just go down to 1500 over here, so that we are definitely well clear of those clouds. Now, in order to follow a heading, or rather in order to follow a GPS track, there's a few things we can do. So let's just go ahead and enter a direct to our destination. Should be somewhere over here. Also, let's ensure that we stay clear of that power plant. Don't want to fly into the funnels there. So let's go ahead and enter a direct Echo Delta Lima Delta, which is the field where we came from. Okay, and activate. So we can now see this is located on a track of 037 degrees. You can see the autopilot is not going to move your... You can see it's not going to move your CDI for you. And we gotta be a little bit careful here that we don't fly into any other funnels as we are in the Ruhr area. Okay, so what we can and what we have to do in order to be able to follow the GPS track is two things. If you've got a modern GPS, you got that heading GPS button up here. If you switch that to GPS, then the autopilot disconnects from following the heading bug. Let's actually do that. We'll just update that direct quickly here. Switch that to GPS. You can see it now stops following the heading bug, and instead what happens now is that your GPS sends a signal, and we just quickly gotta Oh, well, that's interesting performance here. So what happens now is that your GPS basically sends the desired track signal, which the autopilot now uses in order to follow that track. But it's completely disconnected from the heading bug, as you can see over here. So that's the easy way to do this, and that's also the way to do this if you want to follow the correct track. Now, let's switch that back to heading mode over here. The other way that you can follow a GPS track is to put your CDI to the correct target, and remember to switch this to GPS mode. So let's put the CDI to the correct course, which is 028, like this, and only now you can use nav mode to follow the track. What happens now is that your airplane is using the target track from the CDI needle and the deflection sent by the GPS in order to determine its correction signals. However, when you use this type of navigation, what you will notice is that if you set an incorrect track, like now, the airplane is going to go completely haywire. That's because now the autopilot thinks that it has to go this way to keep the deflection centered. However, the deflection won't stay centered, and the autopilot thinks like, okay, so I need to correct slightly to the right now, which it's doing, as you can see, as we're passing the center line from the GPS direct. And now we're completely confusing it, because now it thinks that's my target, I should be flying a little bit to the right of it in order to re-intercept this, but it's actually deflecting further. And that's completely confusing the autopilot. Therefore, if you want to follow a GPS track, what you need to do is to not use nav mode, especially when you try to follow an entire flight plan and not just a single line. So don't use nav mode for that. Instead, use heading mode and switch the heading GPSS knob to GPSS. That way, the airplane can now follow the target track. And when you do this, it is recommended to use GPS mode over here. When I had set that to VLOG, that was why the airplane started twitching a bit earlier, so make sure that this is a GPS mode as well. And then you can actually follow the target track pretty nicely. So that's working pretty well. Apart from that, approach mode can fly a WAAS approach from the GPS as well, so that's quite cool. Alright, now that we're done with the autopilot, we're gonna disconnect it using the switch down here, and now we are going to stay clear of those clouds, get the airplane legal again, and we are pretty much right above our airfield. So let's go ahead, enter the traffic pattern, and then we can start a little bit of touch and go work. Field should be right behind us. So let's just make sure we get back there. So that's a little tutorial on the autopilot there. Not completely obvious unless you understand what it's doing. So always remember, nav mode is not suitable for following a flight plan. Use GPSS and heading mode, while the GPS is actually in GPS mode if you want to follow a flight plan. Alright, so that's a little bit of basic theory there. Looks like the cloud base is coming down a bit, so let's go ahead and find our airport. It should be about 90 degrees to the left of us now. And yep, there it is. And let's actually enter the traffic pattern and then start a little bit of pattern work before the weather turns completely IMC. So, you shouldn't pull the engines completely to idle. That's not good for shock cooling. Therefore, what we're going to do is we're just going to go down to like 12 inches on the manifold pressure there, and then gradually let the speed bleed off. Also make sure that you fly down to pattern altitude before you actually enter the pattern, so that it becomes easier to see where you're going. So weather is just about boundary-like for the traffic patterns right now, but I think we should still be able to do this. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the traffic pattern. generally you want to maintain the speed below 140 knots for that. I'd recommend more like 120. In order to fly that speed nicely, you can use a very nice combination, and that's your previous cruise power setting, so 20 inches, 2100 RPMs, together with flaps 20. So let's just set that power setting, then we'll go flaps 20, like that, and you will see that it'll nicely maintain around about 140 knots. Perhaps a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the weather conditions. It's rather cold outside today, so it has a little bit more performance. Okay, so you can see this, actually you can't see it yet. Let's do a 180-degree turn in a moment, then you'll be able to see the traffic pattern. Alright, so the way we are going to fly the pattern is that we, first of all, got to do it slow. So remember, there's always going to be other people in the pattern as well. You've got a very fast aircraft, so be careful with that. Now let's go ahead and read the checklist. So, approach checklist, boost pumps on, 1 and 2. Boost pumps are on. Then mixture full rich, fuel selector on, and those are both on, never have been elsewhere. Flaps 20 degrees below 175 knots. So remember, the white arc is for flaps full. 175 is below which you can go up to 20 degrees of flap setting there. Then landing gear down below 157, and thereafter it's just gear lights on, hydraulic pressure check, speed 140, and that's the approach checklist. So as you can see, pretty easy actually. Now let's bring ourselves into that traffic pattern and then actually go ahead and fly it. The thing that you really have to time is the descent, because the plane does not have that much power when it's in landing configuration, especially on single engine, but we'll be talking about that in a few moments. So first of all, let's do our standard traffic pattern. There's our field on the 12 o'clock. Let's go ahead and start slowing down. So let's already go gear down. I would recommend to do this early and then fly the pattern with gear down flaps 20, because it just gives you that bit more control. 1200 feet is pattern altitude. We'll make sure that we stay right there. Then you can see speed comes nicely back down when you got the gear down and the flaps 20, and that's what I found to be the easiest setting. Now, the base turn is defined by this little industrial complex over there. And there's our field right in front of us. Okay, let's turn into the downwind. And then what we're going to do is touch and go, and thereafter a second approach. So here we are in the downwind. Now, landing the Aerostar is quite easy. Final approach speed is 100 with flaps full. And you just flare it, hold it, and then you touch down. So we're being the threshold now. We got to turn finally before that road over here. So let's go ahead and start turning. Then we can also start descending. Let's go flaps full. So flaps are coming. And here we go. Flaps are in full. Flap lever back to neutral. And down we go. So we're at the road for the turn. Let's maintain a nice rate of descent while keeping 100 knots. There's our runway down there on the left hand side. And final turn. Remember, you are rather fast for a general aviation aircraft at 100 knots, so be sure to time your turn accurately. Also have a look at the runway so that you can align yourself properly. Like that. Okay. So trim it out. When you enter the flare, be sure to put the props up to maximum for a possible go around. Idle, props maximum, flare, hold it, hold it, hold it, touchdown. Okay, so flaps back to 20. We can already add a little bit of power so that we don't get too slow. Here we go, flaps are in 20, and then takeoff power. 85, rotate, and we are flying. So, tap the brakes, positive climb, keep accelerating, gear up. Around about 500 feet a minute, working fairly nicely to start gaining airspeed after takeoff here. But always think about your props, which we do want to keep in the previous cruise power setting while we're on approach. It's only later that we want to increase the props again. So passing 600, respectively 400 AGL, we can set 24 inches and 2100 RPMs. Then we can also retract the flaps. Even though for pattern work you can absolutely keep the flaps in the 20 position. So we're climbing back up to 1200, back into the downwind. Pretty fast aircraft, so we don't even need to fly any upwind lag here. Alright, and reaching pattern altitude, 20 inches, 2100 RPMs. Perhaps a little bit less inches so that you keep the speed under control. And that's looking fairly nicely. Okay. So that was quite okay. Let's go ahead and do a second one. And on this one we're actually going to do a full stop landing. Because thereafter we are going to start with some engine failures. Okay, so we are now in a nice downwind, and there's our field off to the left. We can see the industrial complex right there at the front. We're approaching the middle of the downwind, so let's go flaps 20. And here we are, flaps 20 are extended. So approaching the middle position of the field, landing gear down. Maintain your pattern altitude for the time being. Maintain a nice speed. Power setting 20 inches, 2100 RPMs normally works quite well. And then we can turn final. Or rather we can turn base. Start the descent. Get the flaps into the landing position. And that is looking superb. Right, so that's our runway. We may be a little bit high right now, so let's reduce power a little bit so that we can lose that altitude. The airplane has a heck lot of drag when you are in landing flaps with the gear down, so you can descend nicely if you want to. Just make sure that you add power again when you are done with your steeper descent. Okay, so overshot once again. That's definitely something I need to work on with this airplane. Make sure that it is in trim. Okay, so now approaching the threshold. Throttle's idle, prop maximum. Flare. Hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it. Touchdown. Bring the nose down, and when the nose is down, you can start braking. The plane brakes very, very well. You can see I'm doing a manual brake to vacate over here. And as you're slowing down, be sure to keep the props at 1000 RPMs. Alright, that was the easy part. That was the multi-engine part. Now we are going to practice a little bit of single engine maneuvering over here. So let's go ahead and return to the holding point where we are going to practice an engine failure upon takeoff. So while we're going back to the holding point, let's already return our aircraft into the standard powers, or into the standard takeoff setting. So that means flaps are going up. Here we are. Then we can trim it so that we are trimmed into a neutral position. Like this. Okay, so as we're taxiing to the holding point, let's go ahead and have a look into the emergency checklists. So, engine failure during flight. That is the important one that we need to be aware of. And the procedure is quite simple and very common to most multi-engine aircraft. So you got prop and throttle full forward, gear up, flaps up, inoperative engine feather. Best angle of climb speed 104, best rate of climb speed 113. And then the rest is basically cleanup duty. So the important things, as I mentioned, prop and throttle full, gear up, flaps up, inop engine feather. And then minimum 104 knots, best rate of climb is at 113, but that's 104 is sufficient, but no slower than that. Alright, and the rest we can do from the checklists later on then. Alright, so let's go ahead and do this. We are going to stow the tablet again. So, very quick check to make sure that we are in a good takeoff configuration. So, all our switches are correct. That's all looking good. Flaps are up and transponder is on. Alright, beautiful. So we can release that parking brake. We can line up again. And in order to make things easy, what we are going to do this time is we are going to cut the engine just after becoming airborne. We will do a second one where we cut the engine right at the point where we are going to rotate the aircraft, which is the most difficult of the possible situations that you can encounter. Okay, ready to go? Let's reset that timer up here. So, mode, reset, and start. Takeoff. Okay, power set. 85, rotate. And we'll close the throttle of the right engine, simulating the engine failure. So, positive climb, gear up. Very important, as you can see we can barely climb on a single engine. Then prop is full forward, so right engine, confirmed, feather. And only that really gives us sufficient power that we can enter a climb and gain a little bit of airspeed. You can see how hardly the airplane wants to climb at all as we're accelerating towards those 104 knots. That's why it's so important that you gain that airspeed. Alright. So here we are, 104 knots. It should climb at about 300-400 feet a minute. As you can see, not very much, but it does climb. And that's the important thing. Alright, now that we're established on a safe climb, let's go ahead and take that tablet. So, operative engine fuel pump, that's gonna be the number 1, is on. Trim as desired, inop engine mixture idle cutoff. So, we can see left engine is running. That means right engine goes to idle cutoff, confirmed. Right engine confirmed. And idle cutoff. Now when you do this, you'll notice the propeller actually stops, and that reduces the drag even more. So, that is really something I would absolutely recommend you get done rather quickly once you're safe. So then, inop engine boost pump off, that's the right side. Off, inop engine fuel selector off, off. Then, inop engine magneto off, off, and inop engine alternator off. Right side, confirmed, off. Okay, land as soon as possible, and that's the engine failure during flight checklist complete. Now what we're going to do is we will have a quick look at the engine in-flight start checklist, so that you guys can get an idea on how to restart an engine. And once that is done, we will come back for our next touch and go. And this time we are going to fail the engine right upon rotation, making it about as difficult as possible. Okay, so you can run the operative engine at maximum power for up to 5 minutes. Thereafter you should reduce to climb power. And, well, we've got sufficient altitude now. Let's start reducing. So, engine 1, 24 inches. and 2400 RPMs. As you can see, it really doesn't like to fly in these conditions, but at least it's not losing altitude. There are a lot of twins that actually have problems maintaining flight under these conditions. This one, luckily, is not one of them. Okay, so the airplane is pretty much trimmed out. Need a little bit of smooth control input here, but apart from that we are flying and we are safe. Okay, then let's go ahead and do the restarting feathered engine checklist. So, fuel selector on. That's the right side fuel selector on. Boost pump on. On. Mixture, idle cutoff, it is. Throttle cracked. Cracked. Magneto both. Okay, and then prop full forward. So the prop should be unfeathering now, and it is. And now starter engage. Okay, so as the engine rotates, which it is doing now, mixture full, and the engine is starting. Here we go. Okay, cool. So, for the warm-up, use 2000 RPMs and 15 inches on the manifold pressure. Let's go ahead and give it those 15 inches. Here we go, throttle down to 2000. Like that. And like that, we'll let the engine warm up. Well, and then oil pressure check for 25 psi. Come on. So here we go, we've got minimum of 25 psi. Alternator on, trim set, and that's the restarting feathered engine checklist complete. Alright, fairly easy going as you can see. Good. The other ones are basically read and do, so you will be able to teach those to yourselves here. And let's go ahead and fly back to our field and start with the next touch and go. On this one we are going to fail one engine in the worst possible moment, which is literally while rotating the aircraft. And with that you will really see how, let's say, difficult it is to fly a twin engine piston aircraft and why you need those multi-engine ratings. But okay, for the time being, let's reduce power down here. The engine is warm enough now. Let's synchronize those props like that. Thank you. Alright, let's maintain 1,200 feet, please, and then we'll fly back to our airfield, back into the traffic pattern. So that should be off to the right hand side here. Field is located just underneath that cloud. It's easy to tell because of the factories of extra aircraft over there. The guys building the extra 300 that you all know from the sim. Those are built right over there at this airport. Okay, so we can basically enter straight into the base leg of our traffic pattern. Over here the cloud seems to be a little bit higher as well, making things somewhat easier. Okay, so where's the road? Yeah, it looks like we're just to the right of it. there's the industrial complex, there's the road, looking good. Alright, so flaps 20. When you enter a traffic pattern like that, be sure that it is not that easy to get the airplane slowed down, so get your gear and your flaps out early enough so that you actually end up at a good altitude while doing the pattern. So we can start our descent right here, and flaps full. And here we go. So we got gear down, flaps full, fuel pumps on, looking excellent. As always, should be at 100 knots for the final turn, and then we can enter that traffic pattern. Alright, this time we'll start the final turn a little bit earlier. It's just difficult when you can't use the head tracker, which I don't want to use in this video because I want you guys to be able to read all the instruments and stuff. Alright, that looks good. Cool. So approaching the final over here. Again, make sure the airplane is completely in trim. Then idle, props full. Flare and hold. Touchdown. Okay, so this one's going to be the interesting one. So flaps up to 20, which is an allowed takeoff setting. Trim is gonna need a little bit nose down trim. Alright, and then let's add power. And we're going to fail the engine right at 85 knots. So, rotate, engine failure, positive climb, gear up. And you can see how we even have problems getting over those trees over here. Flaps up, unnecessary drag only. First things first, survive getting over the trees. Second, build up speed. You can see how it's rather difficult to combine the two. If there were hills or mountains over here, we might already have had a problem. That's just how little performance you have in those multi-engine aircraft. Okay, flaps are up, gear are up. Then let's build those 105 knots. Let's also take a good eye in front of us, making sure we're not flying into anything. No, that's looking good. Okay. So, now we're at 104. Let's go ahead and start climbing slowly but steadily, and then into the traffic pattern. Now let's go ahead and do the checklist. And here's the reason why we didn't climb that well. We didn't feather the engine. See? That's why it is so important to follow those items. And look at that. Suddenly we're also gaining some speed. Okay, so engine failure during flight checklist. Prop and throttle full forward. Gear up, flaps up, and in-up engine feather. We've just done that. Best angle of climb is 104. Best rate of climb 113. Operative engine boost pump on. That's the right side. Boost pump is on. Trim as desired. In-up engine mixture idle cutoff. So that's number 1 confirmed. And idle cutoff. You can see immediately we're climbing a bit faster because the engine is stopping. Okay, so in-up engine boost pump, that's left side off. In-up engine fuel selector, left side off. In-up engine magneto, again left side off. In-up engine alternator, left side off. Land ass up, and that's the engine failure during flight checklist complete. Okay, so looks like the clouds are going like really low by now. So this will definitely be a full stop landing, but this is the last part of the lesson anyway already. Okay, so field is over there on the left. We are now on a nice downwind. We can even get 500 feet a minute out of the airplane. Impressive. Okay, so let's now go ahead and set 24 inches and 2400 RPM. Okay, you're not gonna get too fast with this, so when you're in the traffic pattern, take the flaps to 20, keep the landing gear up. The moment you get the landing gear out, that's when you're committed to descending. So look at this. We're now flying with max continuous thrust. We're now flying with maximum continuous thrust in level flight, and we're nicely maintaining 120. That's thanks to the flaps being in 20 degrees. Now we are going to fly a much wider pattern than we would normally do, because for once we don't have to care about noise abatement this time. Alright, this looks good. Now let's turn into a base, and what we want to do is basically as soon as we are on the 3-degree glide path, that's when we're going to lower the landing gear. And only then, otherwise you will not be able to maintain altitude. Okay, so there's our runway. Let's continue turning towards the final. Again, it maintains a nice 120, but this is with maximum continuous power. Okay. So, here we are. There's our runway. And now let's go gear down. And by doing this, you'll notice our speed is immediately going to start bleeding off, unless we enter a steep descent. We can go flaps full, something that I do kind of like to do, and this is absolutely unofficial procedure here, is that keeping the engine at MCT and then using the flaps to vary the drag, I can kind of control the rate of descent a little bit nicer here than it was originally meant by the manufacturer. And that way I don't have to change my trim all the time and can just keep my rudder input exactly where I want it. So 100 knots on final. You can see this kind of brings us short, so we gotta retract the flaps a little. Here we go, flaps 30. Works very nicely. Okay, and idle. Anticipate the yaw, flare, and let's put it on the center line. All right. So, here we are. The plane taxis fine on single engine, but do always give it like 3 minutes or so on both engines so that you can facilitate a little bit of an engine cooldown. For now, let's go ahead and stop over here and do the after landing checklist. So, after landing checklist, prop full forward, flaps up, then boost pumps off, trim tabs neutral, which they are now, and cabin heater off. That thing is off anyway. Alright, after landing checklist complete, and remember the checklists aren't like complete, so be sure that you also turn off anything unnecessary, such as, for example, transponder standby if you're on an uncontrolled field, the lights as required, so basically for taxi in only beacon, nav and landing lights if it's dark. Okay, so a little bit of power to make it rolling. Once it rolls, it'll taxi absolutely fine on a single engine, and we can just park right over here in the edge in front of the tower. Alright. So this looks just about fine. Park and brake set, and then let's do the shutdown checklist, please. And again, it doesn't matter if you're doing this on a single engine or both engines, the procedure is exactly the same. So, park and brake set, idle for engine cooldown, that's 3 minutes, we've done that. So, radios and lights off. And all I'm gonna keep is the beacon for the time being. Pitot heat going off as well, transponder off as well. Okay, then mixture idle cutoff, that goes for both engines of course. Magnetos idle cutoff, or rather magnetos off, fuel selector off, then alternator off and battery off. And that's the shutdown checklist complete. So, to open the door, unlock it and open it up. Here we go. Then we can get out. And most importantly, when we're done with everything, make sure that you secure the airplane. So let's close it back down. Then ensure that the chocks are in position on both sides. And when that is done, like now, also puts the pitot tube or the pitot cover in place, like here. And if you expect to park the airplane in a little bit of wind, then it's also a good idea to tie it down in the back over here. Well, and with that, I do hope that you guys have enjoyed the tutorial for the A2A simulations Aerostar. I most certainly very much enjoyed getting into this airplane. I really enjoy flying it. It is a very simple airplane, has the basic kind of controls, but it's simulated so incredibly well that I can just say this is a superb simulation, giving you a very good idea of what it's like learning to fly and operating a multi-engine pistoned aeroplane. Thank you very much for watching. As always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video, and with all of that out of the way, I'm really looking forward to see you all again on the next one.